Welcome to episode 47 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on November 19th, 2020. You heard that right. I'm recording this episode very early because we are away for Thanksgiving. I hope those of you who celebrated enjoyed your holiday. Today I have an interview for you with Chris Dyer, an archaeologist and crofter living on Bressay, one of the islands that make up Shetland. He has a very interesting story to share about how he came to be there and his work on the islands. It's something a little different than the norm, but I think you'll like it. Let's get started. I'm going to be quick leading into this episode. The interview with Chris Dyer is a bit of a bonus. It's another one of the interviews I conducted at Jamieson and Smith while I was there. So there is a video version of this interview on their YouTube channel if you'd like to watch it, but this interview does work well in an audio podcast. I do introduce Chris in the episode, so I'll let previous me handle that. But I will add that we were able to go out to visit Chris's croft a few days after the interview, and it continues to be one of my favorite spots on Shetland. Chris works with his sheep, so they are tame enough to have some contact with them as a stranger, which is one of the few places that you can have an interaction like that. Like most sheep, Shetlands are usually wary of strangers, but a tour of the croft, which is called Garths Croft, by the way, I think I neglected to mention that, is not just about sheep. Chris includes history, architecture, and agriculture on his tours, and you come away with a great deal of respect for those who have taken on the crofting life and the amount of planning and work that goes into making a success of it. If you ever find yourself in Shetland, do contact Chris about a tour of Garths Croft. It's very easy to spend an entire day on Bressay if you add in a walk and a lunch at Speldeburn Cafe along with your croft tour. In more normal times, there's a weekly road race there as well, so you runners, keep that in mind. You can get a taste of the experience of visiting the croft by following Garths Croft Bressay on Instagram, where you can also find some charming greeting cards and tote bags that focus on the sheep and other animals of the croft and are perfect for yourself or your crafty friends. While I was there last time, I picked up a tote bag, and Chris has sent over a set of his new gift cards, and one lucky listener will receive both. Please send me an email to ann@familypodcasts.com with croft in the subject line. I will pick a winner on December 6th and send you an email to get your mailing address. This giveaway is just for those with a U.S. mailing address. Again, I'm not going to post about this on social media, though. This is just for those who have listened to the podcast. Without further ado, let's hear from Chris Dyer of Garths Croft Bressay, and I'll see you on the other side.
Hi everyone, I am Anne Frost. I am the host of the I Thought I Knew How podcast and the online International Fiber Festival, and I am here in Shetland at Jamieson and Smith with a guest who has come in with me. This is Chris Dyer. He is an archaeologist for the Shetland Amenity Trust and a crofter at Garths Croft Bressay, where he raises Shetland sheep and heritage breed pork. Welcome, Chris. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Anne. Very nice to be here.
I wanted to have you on for a lot of different reasons. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, though, is as I talk to people about Shetland, there seems to be this perception of Shetland as a bubble in the North Atlantic where people are born and raised here and they're all Shetlanders through and through, and it's a very sort of uniform society, but as I've learned on my trips here in the past, that's not really the case. People come from all over. You've actually come from afar, and so I wanted to ask what brought you to Shetland in the first place to live?
Sure. So I've been in Shetland for 15 years now. So I come from a little town just north of London called Hitchin, quite close to Luton Airport, and it's a hop, skip and a jump to get to Shetland from that neck of the woods. So I began to study in the late 90s in the city of Hull in Yorkshire. My professional background is in history and archaeology. So in due course I started to work on archaeological fieldwork and excavations in the north of England. And I saw a job advertised in Shetland in 2005 for an archaeologist, but as a family, we'd always been in Scotland for our holidays, and I liked the idea of small communities and being able to contribute, and that notion of a crofting lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And I was successful. I took a job as an archaeologist in Shetland, and I've never looked back. So I suppose I've migrated north. I'm keeping going north. But in essence, the very foundation of Shetland, the very foundation of the old rock, using my archaeological observations for over 6,000 years of human history, there has been travel, there has been immigration and emigration. Whether it was the first settlers perhaps playing island hopscotch and coming up from the North Mainland of Scotland, across to Orkney to Faroe to Shetland, whether it was perhaps most sensationally the Vikings and the Scandinavian arrival approximately 1,000 years ago, whether it was even the demographics of the Second World War or the oil era in the 1970s and on, which has fundamentally affected the comings and goings of people in Shetland. So to us ever it's been a diverse community, receptive to new ideas, receptive to new people, and I count myself as very fortunate to call this home.
Yeah, you mentioned many of the different groups that have established communities here. As you came here as an archaeologist, were you sent to sort of focus on one or all, or what are you doing here?
There are many mornings at 5 o'clock in sort of probably about mid-December when I'm out with a head torch and a looming ram or boar comes towards me that I question.
What am I doing here?
In terms of sanity, what am I doing here? So in terms of the archaeology, I have a remit to promote, to protect and interpret the cultural heritage of Shetland, similar to what I do with the croft, which is interpreting and promoting the contemporary and traditional agricultural content. But in terms of the archaeology, it can be very wide-ranging. It can range from assisting with field survey and excavations on Viking house sites or Iron Age brocks. It can cross over into education and lifelong learning, working with primary, secondary, adult education. It can very much involve working with the museum, delivering on-site archaeological content to the sort of heritage visitors that come every year. But it also fundamentally works with the development process. So that is to say, if somebody wanted to build a new house or construct some civil engineering, a big shed or pipeline, as an archaeologist, we have a responsibility to make sure that that's a responsible development, and so that no human history, no cultural heritage is impacted in a detrimental way through that development process. So a lot of my work would involve going out into the hill, walking over pipeline routes or cables or proposed developments, and assessing and then working with the developer to find a solution for all parties that protects the archaeology, but also from an aspirational point of view allows the development to proceed.
So how, as you're doing the assessments, how are those actually carried out? Are you doing small digs? Are you looking at the landscape for signs?
Very much both. I mean, looking at the landscape for signs is a very kind of apposite statement, because within the island communities of Shetland, you have, broadly speaking, 6,000 years of human settlement, of human history.
Right.
That stretches back to the start of the Neolithic, or the New Stone Age, essentially when we stopped hunting and gathering and started saying, do you know what, farming might be a good idea. We're going to build houses, and this is going to be where we grow crops, and we're going to have some sheep there, and we're going to... So, going back 6,000 years, at least that's when we have evidence for the first people who have decided to call this home. It may go back further, but that's what we have sort of scientific evidence for. But for those 6,000 years until the present day, Shetland hasn't grown in size. And so all of those generations, they have been living, working, constructing out of stone, given the relative absence of timber.
Wood, yeah.
And so, combined with the nature of agriculture, which has always been predominantly grazing and hill grazing, we lack the intensive arable or the sort of the major urban conurbations, obviously, with the exception of Lerwick, but I don't think that could quite be classed in the sort of major UK.
It's not London. I love Lerwick, but it's not London.
So, I love London, but it's not Lerwick.
There you go.
You have the potential. I mean, I always try and describe it as a canvas or a tapestry. It's a human landscape, and you can stand atop a hill, looking out and have a sort of panoramic vista, and you can tease apart the different eras of human settlement, precisely because people have tended to build in stone. We lack those urban centres, and the nature of agriculture has always been grazing. It's not been intensive.
Right.
So what that leaves I suppose from an archaeological record, is you have quite often, you could have anything from subtle humps and bumps and undulations in the ground to monuments that have been concealed by storm surges and concealed by sand blow and so on. The multi-period site at Yarsoft perhaps springs to mind from that point of view. But also you can have absolutely fantastic preservation of 2,000-year-old, broadly speaking, Iron Age brocks with the coarse masonry still in situ. You could have, broadly speaking, 1,000-year-old Viking houses that you can walk into, and the walls are still there, and you can see where the doorways were. You can even sometimes see where the shapes of the doorways leading through to between the domestic spaces and where the animals would have been stored.
Right.
So all of that chimes with this canvas or this tapestry of a human landscape, and archaeology can manifest itself in a very real way in Shetland.
That's incredible. Yeah, it is. I mean, your point about, so many people have lived here for so long that really everywhere is an archaeological site, So how, when the companies come through and they need to build, and we're modern day people, we have modern day needs, and buildings need to go up, roads need to go. How does the preservation process happen then if, there's a Viking home where a road needs to be?
Sure.
What happens then?
Well, there was a very good case in point. Actually, just a couple of days ago, I was up in the island of Unst, the northernmost island in Shetland, and I was working with an aquaculture firm. So that's to say, a firm whose principal sort of economic product is salmon.
Okay.
Farmed salmon, which is tremendously important for Shetland, the Shetland economy. And we have to be in a position in this uncertain world that is still it's such an important aspect of the Shetland economy that the channels remain open, as you might say. So this particular company has a number of farms, you might say, kind of maritime farms where caged salmon are brought on, and they were needing to construct a communication mast in the hill. In the island of Unst, effectively, X marks the spot, right on top of a hill, in the middle of nowhere. But that would enable, from a safety point of view, their maritime sites to be able to communicate to each other. So the developer got in touch with me and said that there was a sort of a constraint on the development, and that constraint was that it was a very sensitive archaeological landscape, and they needed to work with a professional archaeologist to protect the cultural heritage and to make sure that there was no impact when they were trailing up the hill or when they took diggers to build this. So on the ground, what we were faced with was there was a nearby Viking farmstead. There was a Neolithic chambered cairn. So this was a burial cairn, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 years old or so. And a sinuous length of prehistoric earthwork, sort of turf and stone. Many years before we had barbed wire heaping stones up and forming linear boundaries. So these were the sort of the known, as you might say. With archaeology, there's always the unknown, often what's underground, and the known. So we knew what the known was, if that makes sense. And so on the ground, it was a process of identifying the archaeology. And in this case, the excellent developers to work with, and it was perfectly feasible to both protect the archaeology in terms of sort of fencing it off, so there was no accidental incursion. And that meant that the archaeology was protected, but it also meant, like you said, we need roads, we need hospitals, we need, life moves on. The developer had the ability to complete the work, and the archaeology was protected. So we tried to work as much as possible within those kind of frameworks.
Mm-hmm. Is there a period of time represented here on Shetland that you would want to sort of slip into for a few days and maybe get some questions answered?
Where do I go back to?
Yeah. Let's talk about time travel.
Okay. Distinct possibility. Okay, right, let's get that. That's a really interesting question, because my background, I'm a bit of a generalist when it comes to archaeology. I've been in Shetland 15 years now, but it's been influenced by the types of projects that I've worked on. So to an extent, we've worked with archaeological research focusing on Viking remains, Viking and Norse structures and longhouses, and that's been both excavation, that's been survey, and it's also led to the reconstruction of a Viking house on the island of Garths. And I think that there's probably a bit of HBO influence here, a bit of Ragnar Lothbrok influence, that you're working in the field with these sites. And the island of Garths is a classic example, because you have an island that's perhaps, I don't know, maybe 12 miles north-south by 5 miles east-west. It's about 60 square miles or thereabouts. And you have hill and you have coastal area, but within that 60 square miles there are over 60 known, let's not say the unknown, known Viking houses or Norse structures. So something very interesting is happening in that particular island 1,000 years ago in terms of the density of these structures that are left behind in the landscape. What's happening is there a mass sort of emigration from the west coast of Norway. I argue that's perfectly plausible, because we see it in the archaeological remains in the landscape. So I think when you work for any period of time in structures, and I think also when you're taken away and you're working in the hill, and I always think this in Bressay, working with the croft, that after lambing, I'll sort of take myself away from the croft for a couple of weeks, and I'll go up into the hill and I'll cut my peat for winter fuel. And when you're surrounded you're not surrounded by anyone other than nature and the skylarks singing and the bonxies, the great skewers kind of circling away. And yet all around you are the signs of human history, the signs of where people have cut peat in the past, or the signs of where prehistoric man has lived. So you do feel, with the risk of sounding a bit sort of, a bit romantic, but you feel history all around you. So the Viking and the Norse era, certainly. The other era will be quite interesting. It's not particularly extravagant, but I've had the good fortune to work quite a lot on the military remains of Shetland. That is to say that, I suppose, the remains of war that have been left behind, principally from the 1418 Great War and the Second World War. And Shetland, obviously, as an island group in the middle of the North Sea, was, I suppose, as it was during the Viking era, it was at the centre of a lot of things going on during these global conflicts, from a maritime point of view, or the potential that invasion may happen.
Right.
And when there was the potential for invasion, in order to sort of repel that, there are a number of guns or traps or fortifications that were erected. And again, because of the relative absence of development pressure, they tended to survive. So I've had the good fortune to work on a number of sort of military projects, and have actually, interviewed and spoken to people that have now since passed away, and find that a particularly interesting period of history. And that might be an era to jump back into.
Time travel.
Both make good television.
Yeah, the Iron Age Brochs, we haven't had any television shows about those yet, so.
We're waiting.
Yeah. How do you find people treat the remains here? And I ask that as an American, where our sort of historical remains are very new. A lot of the Native American remains were made of organic materials that have rotted over time, so we don't have so many of those. And I was in a reconstructed house one time, and someone was thrown out because he reached over and touched a wooden bowl that was 150 years old, and that was like, "You're destroying our artifacts. You must leave." And I've had experiences in the UK where I was in the choir of a church, and the tour guide plunked down a seat and sat on it and said, "Yeah, we found this outside. We think this seat's about 500 years old." It gave me a heart attack. So there's a different sense of history and what needs to be protected. As a young country, we think everything over 50 years old must be preserved. But here, like you said, on Unst, there's so many Viking settlements or structures that you can just walk into. I mean, it's just the walls. It's not. Sure. Yeah. But I feel like in the US that would be cordoned off and you wouldn't be allowed near it. And here you can walk in among a lot of the sites. Are people respectful? Do you find that there's issues that arise because of the access people have to these sites?
I mean, I think historically there have been issues, but I think it's so intrinsically linked with culture, with the landscape, with the sort of the Viking and the Old Norse place names that sort of often describe where you are. That this is, monuments are very much respected. I mean, there are tales from maybe a sort of pre-legislative era where brochs were systematically dismantled and used as ballast for fishing boats to travel off. And there's a lovely Iron Age broch on the west mainland of Shetland, a place called Culswick. And the geology, it's bedrock in that area, it's a beautiful red granite, and it's about a 2-mile track to get out to this particular broch. And all of the ruinous croft houses along the way have suspiciously large chunks of granite in them. So I suppose there's been that until the long arm of the law got involved. There was a historic recycling, you might say.
Historic recycling.
but that had always gone on, and Iron Age brochs were remodelled into Pictish houses. There's evidence at certain archaeological sites of Vikings coming in and sort of Viking artefacts being found within Pictish structures. So no, there very much is a reverence for the sort of cultural heritage, absolutely. And I think that extends with the sort of the local community, but of course, where we find ourselves in Shetland, and why it's been one of the reasons why the past 6 months has been so tough, is that the visitor economy, or what you will, the heritage visitor. We're sitting speaking during a virtual and online Shetland Wool Week, whereas this time last year we had the good fortune to welcome, including yourself, over 300 visitors to Garths Croft in Bressay. But that notion and that importance of encouraging people to come to visit, to be welcomed within the Shetland Islands, to come and, I suppose, spend money in bed and breakfast and in hotels, that's all absolutely integral to the economy. So it serves our interests to be reverential towards these archaeological remains, because that is a significant reason why a number of people would want to travel to Shetland in the first place. The prospect of seeing a 2,000-year-old Iron Age broch that still stands 10 metres tall, and to be able to
climb it,
walls, or to go and see a Viking longhouse and stand in it and pretend that you are Mr. Ragnar. Those are big reasons. So it serves our interests as well to make sure those monuments are protected.
Indeed. So we've covered two of the reasons why I wanted to have you on. I wanted to have you talk about being a transplant, and I wanted to talk to you selfishly about some of the archaeology going on here in Shetland. But I think we need to get on to crofting now and talk about sheep, so our knitters are happy with us. So you came for the archaeology, but after a few years, I believe, you actually purchased a croft. Why take that leap into crofting?
Well, I moved to Shetland to work in archaeology, but whilst I worked in archaeology in England, from a Monday to Friday point of view, you might say, I fell in with a wonderful couple quite close to the city of York in the north of England, who had a farm. And so I began to, it was actually through an archaeological dig, we were carrying out some research on their land, and I sort of made the throwaway comment of, if you ever need a hand, give me a call. And lo and behold, one day they give me a call. And so I would spend my weeks working in archaeology and my weekends working on this farm just outside the city of York. So I began to get a bit of a grounding in, I don't know, fencing, a little bit of stock work, and there was a lot of kind of woodland and forestry stuff that's less applicable for Shetland.
Yeah.
The point being, I suppose, that there's not one drop of agricultural blood in my body, and I tend to let people judge at the end of a tour of Garths Croft Bressay whether that was a prudent decision on my part or just one of complete nonsense. So I, shortly after moving to Shetland, having sort of this burgeoning interest in archaeology, I approached a couple of the tenants of one of the farms on the island of Bressay, and I said I'd like to come and work with them, or for them rather, during one of their lambing periods. Very busy commercial farm.
Yeah.
1,000 plus commercial cross-yows, and endeavouring to assist with their lambing, and in the first occasion not get in the way. And so that was great. I mean, that was very, very hard work, very intensive. You know, the commercial first cross Cheviot, Shetland ewes, and Suffolk rams going to them, so producing kind of Suffolk lambs, which is a sort of principal mainstay of Shetland small lamb exports. And from that, and from being in the island of Bressay, I would start to work occasionally. There'd be some kind of lambing work or clipping work or fencing and bits of dry stone and dry stone walling that was needing repaired. And so I did that for a number of years, and then the opportunity arrived to purchase Garths Croft at the south end of the island of Bressay, very close to the mid-Victorian Stevenson Lighthouse that guards and welcomes visitors to the south end of Lowick Harbour. And so that was about 6 years ago when we finally acquired a piece that we could call our own.
And I think some people are confused because it's called Garths Croft, but you're Chris Dyer, so I assume Garth was the previous owner, or the original owner,
Yeah,
or where does the name come from?
Garths is you see the place name, it's a place name.
Okay.
Yeah. So you see it's quite a common place name across the north of Scotland, but specifically in Shetland, and it's a Viking or an Old Norse descriptive word, and it simply means enclosure.
Oh, okay.
Historically, that's been the name. It's a rather sort of, it could have been more exciting. You know, it could have meant something, could have meant something more dramatic. It means enclosure. But Garths Croft, or technically Garths of Kirkcudbright. Kirkcudbright means farm of the church.
Okay.
Bister, farm, Kirk. But we now own Garths Croft, which is approximately it is very much a small holding. So we own about 25 acres.
Okay.
We graze another 15 either crofts that we are in the process of acquiring, or crofts that we have kind of relationships with, and we graze, but the land all adjoins each other. So perhaps what's most attractive, that when we were on tours of the croft, is at the Croft House where we start our tours of our agricultural holding, which take in the native breeds of sheep and pork and poultry and horticulture. The Croft House is right in the middle, and the land that surrounds it, so you feel cocooned in the safety of this beautiful part of the island of Bressay.
Yeah, it's a lovely location. It's absolutely beautiful. I think when we were there, it was somewhere around 4 o'clock, I want to say, and the light and the view and, the landscape around it's absolutely beautiful. It's definitely worth making the 10-minute trip on the ferry.
10-minute trip to Bressay, so you would obviously, for the non-Shetland audience, you would be getting on a passenger ferry in Lowick, in the capital of Shetland, and taking that 10 minutes, even if it's slightly under 10 minutes. But doing that for the first time, like so many wool weekers were last year, and it was so heartening. Because I thought it'd be a nice thing to come and meet folk in person and sort of accompany them back to the island of Bressay. So I was travelling across kind of incessantly, numbers of times a day, and to be, as you approached Lowick, this sort of sea of hats that was waiting to greet you. And it was great because you knew who was coming, who was on the tour. But what I was going to say about that crossing to the island of Bressay is that I think if you're doing it for the first time, it's quite novel. You're not going to get seasick. It's a sheltered. You're right in the middle of Lowick Harbour. It's a short crossing. It's very attractive from an aesthetic point of view because the post-medieval waterfront of Lowick disappears as you approach the rural landscape of Bressay, and you get a totally different maritime take on Lowick. I always think living in Bressay, you have the best of both worlds. We are very much an island community, a wonderful island community supported by a brilliant shop, a brilliant ferry service. But at the same time, we are an island, but similarly we have access to the capital of Shetland very readily and very easily. So we can get our sort of bigger commodities or animal feed or so on that we're needing to travel, animal bedding, that kind of thing that we're needing to travel out the island for. So I would heartily encourage and indeed welcome future visitors.
Yeah. So if people do make the crossing, which they should, and go and visit and do a croft tour, what can they expect to see at the croft?
Well, so we've really taken the idea of a traditional Shetland croft, and we want to keep the holding, which is very small, as mixed as possible in terms of animals, in terms of horticulture, in terms of endeavouring to establish a woodland. So what the visitors can see is that we would start within the byre, the old sort of animal building, and there is a sort of a projector and a rolling display of images of the agricultural year, and usually tea and coffee is served, and we get to know each other and get to know the group, and get to know the individuals, and find out what their interests and aspirations are. So it's always very personal. It's always very bespoke, and trying to find out what's encouraged people to come and visit the island and come and visit the croft. And from the byre, we then go and meet the Shetland Sheep. So depending on the time of year, obviously now during Wool Week, our lambs are, they aren't the sort of cute, fluffy things that they were at the start of spring, in late April, early May time. And some of them are pretty. Even for Shetland lambs, they're pretty hulking. They're doing good. So we go and see the lambs and the Shetland Sheep, and specifically the interest that we have is that native breed. That, and I'm sure you've heard the comment that the Shetland Sheep tend to survive on the promise of a blade of grass every May time. they're wonderfly hardy animals, and even in the lambing time, in sort of late April, early May, it's we can get sort of horrible sleety showers that might blow through from the north, and I've seen Shetland lambs maybe a couple of hours old in that sort of sleety, very, very cold weather, and it's almost as if they've rolled their sleeves up saying, right, what are we doing now? They're just very, very, very hardy animals. But our tour would take in the Shetland sheep, and we've always kept them reasonably tame. I can go into a little bit more detail about why in due course. But we also have heritage breeds of pig, saddleback, Iron Age, and Tamworth pigs. It's all homebred animals, homebred pork ultimately, but also homebred weaners, sort of 6-8 week old piglets that we, members of the farming or the crofting community, it's quite popular to sort of take weaners. But we're trying to use those pigs as much as we can traditionally, that is to say, to dig over ground that we can come and reseed subsequently, which in turn benefits our Shetland sheep. So we're sort of always refreshing the grazing. And then we also have heritage breeds of poultry, of hens, of Orpington Tern and Shetland and Dominique hens. And largely we're self-sufficient. We're obviously self-sufficient in meat in terms of lamb, pork and poultry and eggs. But we grow all of our own vegetables, whether that's in terms of potatoes, whether that's in terms of root crops, carrots, neeps, turnips, I should say. But also we have a polycrop structure, which is effectively a Shetland version of a greenhouse. And that enables us to grow, it enables us to achieve a sort of 40 degrees Celsius, very warm during the sort of the summer months, which allows us to grow apples and plums and cherries, strawberries and raspberries, which we tend to have a glut of. And for about a month, I'd say to my wife, okay, right, what we're going to do for dinner tonight? Raspberries. Raspberries. You just have a big glut. We need to think better how to address that. So essentially, we don't run an agricultural holding which is just sheep or just arable or just cattle. I like that idea of tradition, of heritage, and as I've said to many people before, I tend to take the view that life is a story rather than a chapter. And what I drill down, what I mean by that is, if I wanted to be tremendously efficient, and if I needed to, if I was compelled to, I would, and I had a field that I needed to plough and reseed and grow new crops, I would take my tractor and I would maybe do it in a day, plough the field, let it dry out, and then harrow it, roll it, sow it, and the seed would hopefully come. But I'm more of the view that I tend to like pigs. They can sort of take maybe 6 months, maybe a year. They will root and they will dig over. They will take out all of the weed seeds. They'll obviously fertilise, very effective at fertilising as they go. In fact, somebody got in touch with me in the Island of Bressay a couple of weeks ago and said, he sent me a message and said, could I get a trailer of pig muck, please? I've planted some new trees and I'm wanting some sort of mulch so that the grass can't impact on the initial establishment of the tree. So I've put many things in my trailer over the years. But so yeah, we take in all those elements. We take in the sheep, the pigs, the poultry, the horticulture, and also the dry stone walls. So I've built maybe over 500 tons of dry stone fashioned into dry stone walls, which is fundamentally part of Shetland heritage, Shetland culture, and provides an environment for livestock protection from sort of winter gales. It provides an environment for small nesting birds to breed, be that starlings and wrens, and it also allows us to endeavour to establish our own contribution in the form of a small woodland.
So you do raise the Shetland sheep, and I think many viewers know that there's many different colors, many different patterns. As someone who raises Shetland sheep, are you trying to encourage certain colors or certain patterns? Is there a preferred one as far as marketability or preference among the spinners who come to your croft?
I think there's different arguments there. From a sort of major commercial point of view, principally the majority of folk in Shetland are looking to produce lambs that can be exported, whether that's principally kind of Suffolk or Cheviot or Lynn maybe. A pen of 50 lambs, all white lambs with the black faces, and that's great, and that's one thing, and that's obviously sort of an important part of a very important part of the Shetland agricultural economy, and it's what the buyers want, in turn down in the north of Scotland, Aberdeenshire and the borders. What I'm seeking to do and it was playing very much to my sort of interest in history and interest in archaeology and native and heritage breeds. Is specifically to breed for colour and to endeavour to retain and enhance and promote the traditional markings within the Shetland Sheep. So I'm probably not the most popular person of the wool brokers, because my fleeces, in and of themselves, a fleece will have different qualities. My fleeces, in addition, will have different colours as well as different qualities.
Right.
So I am absolutely an advocate for, you know, the flecket sheep. You know, I must imagine like the flecks of paint, almost like a child's drawing. Just the kind of beautiful multicoloured, the cap nuggets, that is to say, that often the sort of dark grey, cream, white with a dark underbelly. The murdits, that is to say, the dark browns, and I always love when I shear my murdet sheep, because when you're clipping them, they look like two different sheep. You're working away, and to start with, you realise as the fleece becomes to come off that they're a beautiful dark, rich brown, chocolate kind of coffee colour, and that's their natural colour. And obviously, you're clipping away, you're shearing away in sort of maybe July time for the ewes. And I always think, like, I kind of laugh a little bit because they always have sort of frosted tips.
Yeah.
They go a little bit.
They go like red.
A little bit lighter in summer. So the fleece is a beautiful cross section of the fleece, from a sort of dark, rich brown, almost to a blonde. A blonde highlight, as you might say, on top. And so I'm specifically interested in selecting a ram that can then obviously go to my ewes, and to a certain degree, the dice fall where they fall, and I run a flock that has probably about 6 or 7 different markings in it at present, and sometimes we will just get white lambs or black lambs, but I'm always interested to try and breed for colour, to retain those traditional markings. And I'm sure all of, the vast majority of your viewers will be familiar with the rather famous poster of the traditional markings in Shetland Sheep.
Yeah,
over 50.
They're like 2 inches by 4 inches or so, and it's a big poster.
Yeah,
all the different ones.
And wholly sort of Viking Old Norse descriptive words referencing the colours, referencing the markings of the fleeces. So that's very much what I'm interested to do, and it's always a delight when it comes to lambing to see what type of lamb we've got.
Yeah, what did you get this time?
You're always hoping that it will be a sort of a female lamb that will potentially be a future gimmer that will give you maybe 8 years or so of lambs in the future. So this year we were very fortunate. We had a lot of flecket ewe lambs, a lot of sort of black and white and multicoloured ewe lambs, which is great. We'll retain all those and keep for future breeding.
Is there a question that you get more often from your knitter and spinner tourists who come to visit?
It's always quite interesting, and I think we both, it's maybe not so much questions, but we both learn off each other. There's a common ground, but I always say that the knitters, they're the talented folk. I'm the grubby hand that gets it to a certain stage through animal welfare and husbandry that the artistic community can then create, can then make the sort of beautiful ornate, whether it's through spinning and carding and producing yarn, or making the most beautiful ornate piece of clothing. So it's an interesting one. I think we both learn off each other, and there was a very nice occasion a couple of years ago, and this perhaps illustrates island communities quite nicely. I got handed an envelope on the ferry, and it was a lady who had been on one of our croft tours. I think it was during a wool week, but anyway, I just got past this envelope on the ferry. It was kind of a bulky envelope, so I threw it in the Land Rover. I thought, well, look at that in due course. And it turned out to be a ball of yarn and maybe half a dozen photographs, and it was a lady who purchased one of our fleeces through the croft tour. She'd taken away a sort of a black and silver fleece, and it was the process behind it, little photographs of carding and spinning, and it was an example of some of our yarn. And then and then images of the beautiful shawl she'd made. So I think that was wonderful to see, and perhaps illustrative of how island communities work. And this envelope found its way to me just through the ferry crew.
So, Chris, as you have all these visitors come to the croft and see all the projects that you're doing and the efforts that you're putting in there, is there something, a lesson or two, that you hope that they take away from their experience there?
I think what I would aspire for folk to take away is that it's part of a lifestyle, it's part of an experience, and when folk come and they visit the croft, my home is their home, and I always say to folk, if they get bored, there's no door that's locked. They can just take themselves off and go have a look at the pigs and the piglets, or go back to the sheep again and feed the sheep. But essentially, the croft itself, the croft house, and the agricultural outbuilding, it has that traditional look of what a traditional Shetland croft would have been. I'm not particularly interested in expansion in terms of big sheds and hundreds more sheep and so on. So I want people to come and feel that they can immerse themselves in an experience, in a lifestyle, and to engage with myself and my wife who live that lifestyle, so they can see how history and nature and culture intertwine. So we just want to continue to welcome people, show them the animals, the good quality of animal welfare and animal husbandry, sheep, pigs, the poultry, the horticulture, the soft fruits, encouraging, I suppose, a bit of self-sufficiency in life, which is always a nice thing and a satisfying thing to go and to go away having immersed themselves in an island community and the sort of contemporary aspects of an island community.
That's wonderful. Why don't you take a moment and tell everyone how they can get in contact with you?
Absolutely. So we are Garths Croft Bressay on Instagram. One of these days I'll get my act together and make a website, but for now, if you go to @Garths Croft Bressay on Instagram, all of my details are up there, mobile phone number, email address, @Garths Croft Bressay. It's happening. That's where it's at.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'm laughing because I was just harassing him about not having a webpage.
It's really very easy.
I sent links and everything. Chris, thank you so much for coming and spending the afternoon with me and filling everybody in on the experience that they can have at the croft.
Thanks for having me, Anne. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
It's always a delight to speak with Chris and pick his brain a bit, so many thanks to him for taking the time to speak with me while I was there. Do check out Garths Croft Bressay on Instagram and send me an email to ann@familypodcasts.com to enter the giveaway of greeting cards and tote bags. If you would like to just order some for yourself, you can find them listed on the Garths Croft Bressay Instagram feed. I will be back next week. Until then, thank you for listening and knitting with me for a bit. If you'd like to support the show, please visit patreon.com/IthoughtIknewHow to make a monthly pledge. You may also consider making a purchase from one of our sponsors by visiting the website ithoughtIknewHow.familypodcasts.com and clicking the link at the top that says Be a Booster. While you're on the site, you can also find the show notes for each episode. Thank you ever so much to my patrons, Knit New Haven, and Morehouse Farm for sponsoring the podcast. Find me on my social media accounts as I Thought I Knew How, except on Twitter, where it's just Thought I Knew How. The groups on Ravelry and Facebook are both called I Thought I Knew How Podcast. Until next time, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time.